So a couple of weeks ago, I made this video about the Rings of Power, saying that after watching episodes 1 and 2, I didn't feel I had enough to go on yet to make a review on it or to judge it on its own merits, only on the conversation around it, which wasn't worth it at the time. It wasn't worth your time or mine. Things have changed. I'm making this because I do not intend to finish the Rings of Power after watching episodes 3 and 4, and so I wanted to get out all of my thoughts on the show now. I'll probably watch the finale to see where they end up, but basically, it's a total waste of time, and I don't recommend it. Spoilers ahead for the very little that has happened over the course of the 4 hours I have wasted on this show. The first thing I want to get out of the way, right out of the gate, is that I don't want to do this to join the chorus of right-wing bigot trolls who exist out there who hate this show because it includes representation. That's absolutely not a problem in this show. The argument that these people are making is that Middle-earth should be entirely white when portrayed on screen in the 21st century. I mean, come on! There being characters of color in this show doesn't affect it in any way. But let's be clear, they didn't go nearly hard enough. Amazon is an evil corporation, and still, like, 80% of the cast is white, so I don't know what these people are complaining about, if I'm being entirely honest. The main problem, of course, is the writing. I want to be clear again, much like I said in my Sandman video, which is there, the issue is not with the CGI artists and the actors. I'm sure they're all very talented. In fact, there are some very beautiful, epic shots in this show, and the actors are doing what they can with the material in front of them. It's just that they don't have anything to sink their teeth into, and the show is pointless, and you can't make a pointless show good by making it pretty. Episodes 1 and 2... my feelings on them at the time were that they weren't good, but they were kind of inoffensive. There was no drama or tension, but nothing that really got me riled up, with a couple of exceptions. Turns out that was the show putting its best foot forward. Episodes 3 and 4 are unambiguously terrible, for all kinds of reasons. At every point the series waffles, it spends time on uninteresting, pointless storylines, it feels directionless, without motivation, and it misses every interesting opportunity it comes across. So let's start with the elves. The elves in this show are very much sort of the initiating point of view characters, although there are many, many storylines. We're going to get to them all. The elves, we start with this kind of pointless opening, which is Galadriel and a bunch of soldiers going into the north trying to find Sauron. It's been 500 years, by the way. They still haven't found him. Galadriel is desperate to find him, but she's the only one. So far, so fine, whatever. But the sequence is kind of pointless because they go into the north, the conditions are bad, the soldiers want to return home. They find an ice troll, she kills it no problem, and then all of her soldiers go, yeah, we're not following you anymore, we're gonna go back. And instead of continuing, she decides to come back with them. It's as uninteresting as I just described it. That's it. That's the cold open of the show. We then get the political maneuvering of the elves. The elves want to be done with looking for Sauron. They're not content with Galadriel going off on her own and trying to find him. They're like, no, we want all of the elves to forget about Sauron and live a peaceful life. And the king, Gil-galad, sends Galadriel, along with a lot of other elves, to the Grey Havens. Now, why is it a problem for Gil-galad to be sending people to Valinor? Well, the point of the Grey Havens in Lord of the Rings is Silmarillion, and I promise it's not all going to be me being a Lord of the Rings buff saying, oh, they didn't do it the way the books did it. But there's a point here, and that is that the passing over into Valinor, into the Grey Havens, is meant to be a personal, spiritual choice. The elves are leaving in Lord of the Rings because there's this great sadness for the way that the world is, and it's passing on as sort of a metaphor for finding peace and finding rest after all of your struggles and strife. The reason that Bilbo and Frodo get the choice to go to the Grey Havens is because they have suffered so much and have been so deeply hurt in sort of a metaphor for PTSD, and this allows them to find some peace and rest. So I have an issue when the High King of the Elves is the one dictating to other people that they should find peace and rest. That's my problem. Elrond isn't so bad. I don't mind the portrayal of Elrond in this show. I think the actor's doing a good job. He's sort of a politician, which is in keeping with who he ends up becoming. But there's a lack of history involved with the elves, and especially with Elrond, because I don't feel that what they're doing is offensive, but rather what they are not doing. Elrond is the twin brother of Elros, who are both half-elves. They each get the decision of whether they're going to be elves or men, or humans rather, and Elrond chooses to be an elf, while his brother Elros chooses to be a human, and ends up becoming the first king of the Numenorians and reigns, like, he lives for 500 years, and this is the ancestor of Aragorn. Does the show pay any attention to that very crucial part of the storyline? Does it mention for Elrond what it's like for his brother to have chosen immortal life and to die? We know from Lord of the Rings that Elrond still kind of has an axe to grind with humans and with the marriage of humans and elves. How does he feel about his parents? How does he feel about Elros's decision? Maybe he resents that. Maybe he's got an axe to grind with the Numenorians, who are the descendants of his brother. But there should be something, right? The show mentions Elros in episodes 3 or 4, and they mention it with the casualness that you might mention that you bought a new jumper or sweater. It's baffling to me. Galadriel is related to these people, and when she's... let's talk about Galadriel, actually, because she's a cool action hero in this show who's desperate to fight Sauron. That's kind of it. Once she decides not to go to Valinor by jumping off the boat, her storyline gets a little convoluted. She gets picked up by some sailor refugees who turn out to be Southlanders, who are between Middle-earth and Numenor for some reason. There's a sea monster. That's a thing for like 2 seconds with no stakes to it, and then it's gone. And then they end up being picked up by the Numenorians. So really strange, circuitous route that Galadriel's story takes, considering her obsession with Sauron, in my opinion. Let me be clear, I don't have a problem with her not being over the war with Morgoth. That seems perfectly normal, nor do I have a problem with her being a badass. But badassery is different from being so cool there's no problem I couldn't solve. And Galadriel tackles every social interaction by insulting and defying the people around her, which seems like an interesting choice for an elf who's already, at the very least, 1,000 years old by this point. Right? It's a strange characterization to have her be all fury and no tenderness or tact or ability to communicate with other people properly. At least that's what I think. And it's a characterization that doesn't help your audience get invested in Galadriel's story arc. If every problem she faces, she can either deal with no problem, or is such a blunt instrument that she can never get done what she needs to get done, and is getting advice from a human for most of the time she's on screen, I'm not engaged. I don't want to follow that person. That person, I don't understand what she's fighting for. She never shows a particular amount of love or tenderness for the elves in her kingdom. She's got this obsession with destroying Sauron, but we never even see her self-deceive herself. Like, I don't know, in a moment of self-deception, saying, "Oh, this is all for the elves and humanity," which it should be, like for the mortal races of Middle Earth. So her motivation seems to be solely, I want to destroy, and it's at the cost of her own men. There's no middle ground with her. Yeah, that's kind of it. That's all I have to say about Galadriel, really. So let's talk about the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. First of all, very cool to see Moria and Khazad-dûm prior to Lord of the Rings, seeing it as a sort of a thriving community. I think that's a cool choice. I don't oppose that being a choice. And having the elves and the dwarves work together works. This would be before their like big schism where they hate each other, right? I can't remember exactly what it is, but in the Silmarillion, it's something like there's a king of the elves who commissions a work from a Dwarven Kingdom. They give it to him and he doesn't pay them, and that's the source of Dwarven elf animosity. Something like that. I can't remember exactly. So dwarves and elves working together works for me. That's totally cool. Durin and Elrond being friends works as well, and the interesting point that is made about elven longevity and how they don't visit for a long span of time works as well. It would have been nice if, dwarves live for hundreds of years, so maybe if Elrond hadn't visited in 70 years rather than 20, that would have made more sense as to why Durin's angry about that. Because 20 years would be like if you didn't see your friend for 5 years, in human terms, which is something that happens. Let's talk a little bit about the contest that Elrond uses to get in. It turns out, again, spoilers, that the dwarves are hiding the fact that they are mining this new ore mithril from the elves because they're afraid, I guess, that the elves are going to want to take it for themselves. So Durin doesn't let Elrond into the kingdom at all. He then gets challenged by Elrond to a duel. I don't remember what they call it, but the duel is who can break rocks for the longest, and Elrond loses. This could have been a more interesting trial. This could have been something with a little bit more back and forth, a little bit more tension, a little bit more, I don't know, there could have been stakes to it, maybe. Maybe not the certain knowledge that all we're going to see are guys breaking rocks for a bit. There's no back and forth in that. There's no, ooh, who's going to win? It's just, yeah, we'll wait until you're done breaking the rocks, and then whoever's won's won. It's boring. It's a boring story beat. And all the hullabaloo is about Elrond not coming to Durin's wedding or coming to the birth of his children, which is a fair point. So we should meet the wife and children. We do meet his wife. I believe her name's Dina. I could be wrong. I don't care to look it up. She's a very cool character. She's level-headed. She sings to the mountain to find ore. That's a very cool idea. And actually one of the shots that I think is the most beautiful in these 4 episodes is her singing into the mountain, and what they did with the vocals and the sound design there. I want to give a huge shout out to the people who worked on that because it's very, very cool and very good. It's pointless. Or made pointless by, here's what happens. The dwarves are hiding mithril. Elrond finds out they're hiding mithril. He goes to the mine. Some dwarves get trapped in a mine, and Dina sings to the mountain to release these miners. And 2 seconds later, her husband Durin shows up saying, "We got the last of them out," which implies that that had already happened before she started singing, or we needed to know that she was singing earlier. It just doesn't land as a story point. It's very cool, and the concept of it works really well. It's just very poorly executed, which is most of the problem with this show. Also, we never see his children. We never see little dwarven children in the room with Elrond and Durin and his wife. They're always off somewhere, and we hear their little voices, which is very cute, but I want to see little dwarven babies. I want to see dwarven children. It would have gone a long way towards making me happier as an audience member if I got to see little dwarven babies. Also, very briefly, let's touch on dwarven women's beards. No dwarven women in this show have beards. That seems to be a conscious choice to not have them have beards. I don't know why this choice was made. It's a really small thing. It's not egregious. It doesn't detract from the show in any way, except that it contradicts Lord of the Rings. That's the only thing it does. The time spent in Khazad-dûm is pretty much pointless after Elrond makes this overture to Durin. The rest of the time is spent... Basically, the idea, I think, is the unifying thing of the Khazad-dûm arc is that Durin has anger issues, but he never manifests those in a way that is uncomfortable for the audience. It's always a matter of being upset with Elrond and not talking to him properly, or being mad at his dad and not talking to him properly, and in each instance, the solution posited by the show is that this very angry man should get over himself and talk to his friends, which works. My only issue with this storyline is that it's boring. The stakes aren't high enough for this to warrant the amount of time they spend on it. Should people who are angry and who aren't talking out their feelings and problems speak to the subject of their ire? I think so. I think that's a reasonable point to make. Do I think that that deserves tens of minutes of screen time? Absolutely not. So let's talk about the Herfoots and about Gandalf. The Herfoots are proto-hobbits in this show, and they are fine. They are sort of like travelers, and they're very, very good at hiding, especially from big people and any other predators that might be after them. A couple of the best shots in this show are the couple of beats where it turns out that they're all hiding in plain sight, and then they move, and you go, oh man, they were there the whole time. Really, really cool. It happens a couple of times. It happens once in episode 1, and it happens once, I believe, in episode 4, when they all hide, when Gandalf shows himself, and he looks around and is like, where is everybody? And they're all there. That's delightful, and they are meant to be delightful. So that's fine. They're fine. The point of the Harfoots arc, it seems to me, is to receive Gandalf. A comet falls from the sky, big meteor, turns out to be a human, or not a human, turns out to be a being, a sentient being, who is probably Gandalf from all the things that they're saying. They haven't confirmed that it's Gandalf. Why? Because Gandalf can't talk. And that's my big issue with if it's Gandalf. Listen, if it turns out not to be Gandalf, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but it seems like it's Gandalf. He's got bits where he talks to animals. When he uses his magic, it feels very much in the same aesthetic as when he does his big, intimidating voice to Bilbo. Here's the thing. The wizards are angels. They're Maiar. They're lesser angels. And famously, angels can talk. Angels could speak the common tongue of mortal men and elves. So the fact that this person can't communicate, maybe because he hit his head as he fell out of the sky, there are all kinds of theories that it might be Sauron, that it might be Tom Bombadil. Please God, let it not be Tom Bombadil, first of all, because that ruins that character entirely. But also, if it's Sauron, what did he do? Yeet himself into space so that he could fall back down and get guided somewhere by halflings? The only thing that makes sense is that it's Gandalf, and that explains somehow why he has a love of these people in the future. Why he cannot talk, I have no effing idea, and it doesn't make sense, and it's frustrating as a fan. And it's boring. He's gonna go somewhere where the stars look like so. That's it. So let's talk about Numenor. Numenor, again, visually looks beautiful. I just want to address one thing. I heard online, I can't find a quote anywhere, but I heard that the writers of this show said that they specifically weren't taking inspiration from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. I call bullshit. And the reason I call bullshit is because this could not be more proto-Minas Tirith if it tried. Do you not agree? This architecture matches the stuff from Lord of the Rings. It just does. So if they had done it on purpose and said, hey, this is clearly going to end up being what things are in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I just don't like that they lied. Also, the Numenorians are shown to be racist against elves here. Okay, fine. You're related to them, and that should mean something, but it is the storyline of the Silmarillion that they grow in pride, become suspicious of the Valar, thanks to Sauron's influence. We'll get to Sauron. Make war on them, and their island is destroyed. The Numenorians here are instead racist against elves, and there's a whole speech that a guy on a pedestal, on a wood box, says about elves coming and taking their jobs. Clearly, this is meant to be a parallel with our world. It doesn't make a huge deal of sense. Institutionalized, ingrained racism has roots. There are reasons that it exists, bad reasons that should be done away with forever. It's out of self-interest and it's out of fear. The Numenorians, what do they have to fear from the elves? They haven't seen them, presumably, in hundreds of years. They are also long-lived. That never comes up, by the way. You remember I talked about Elros and how they're descendants of his, and Aragorn is 87, and Éowyn is like, what? You're one of the Numenorians. These are the Numenorians at the height of their power. At least their main royal lineages should be kings and queens who live for 200 plus years. It never comes up in conversation. But the Numenorians themselves are like, we're terrified of elves. These people we haven't seen in hundreds of years. I didn't buy it. We also see Arendelle. Arendelle from the Silmarillion is a very important Numenorian. He is specifically the ancestor of Aragorn, who survives the destruction of Numenor, which is going to happen at some point, and founds the countries of Andor and Gondor, which is very important. So we see Arendelle in this show. He seems suitably regal, I guess. But we also spend a lot of wasted time on his children. There's a whole story arc which is totally pointless, where his son wants to be in the crew of a Numenorian ship, and his friends keep making mistakes, and he keeps saving them and trying to cover their asses, and naturally he's punished for it every time and is thrown out of the program. That's a whole story arc in this show. I don't know why I watched it. It's boring, and it leads nowhere. We also spend a little bit of time with his daughter, who's being courted by the son of a politician character who's in Numenor. Moving on, there's also this character, I believe his name is Halbrand, I don't care to look it up, who is this rogue, rapscallion survivor character who Galadriel runs into on the open ocean. He ends up being the exiled king of the Southlands, who were famously the people who sided with Morgoth against the elves and men and all the good guys. We never learn, or at least haven't learned yet, why he's been exiled. He's also a long way from home. And he's not a good guy. Let me break down what happens to him in Numenor. He wants to live a peaceful, normal life, working as a blacksmith, it seems. So he goes to the blacksmiths and he says, hey, can I have a job? I'm as good as any of you are. I'm very good at this. I would like to work here and live a peaceful life. These workers say, F you, no. You need to join the guild and earn one of these little badges before you can work in any forge. So naturally, he buys them all drinks and steals that from them. First, let me say, this is a dumb move. He still wouldn't be registered with the guild. He would still show up at a forge somewhere and be like, hey, I've got this pin, let me work here. And everyone would be like, you don't work here, we don't know you. Well, let's leave that aside. He takes the pin, he goes into a back alley, the people follow him because they saw that he took the pin. So he's not even very good at it. He tries to give it back, says, I don't want any trouble. They hit him twice, and he proceeds to break their arms. A conflict that was entirely self-generated, that goes against his stated goal, ends in him beating the shit out of a bunch of random Numenorians in a back alley, and he gets thrown in jail for it. I don't know what else to say about that. But that leads me to the Southlanders. Now, the Southlanders, our POV character is a woman with a blue dress. I don't know her name, and I don't care to. Blue dress lady, she'll be known for from now until the end of time. And she has a attraction to an elf who is stationed in a nearby elven outpost watchtower. You know, they aren't officially together yet, but they're sort of dancing around that idea. And the Southlanders, again, the people who sided with Morgoth, and the elves are all like, these people 500 years ago sided with Morgoth, so clearly these people now are bad, and it's only a matter of time before they continue to do bad things. Also, in that same establishing episode, the elves get the news that they are returning home because there's no longer a threat from these people. So there are mixed messages. The Southlanders themselves seem to be of two categories. The first are the people who hate elves and wish for the good old days when Morgoth was leading them. They hope that Sauron will come and take his place so that they can once again make war on the West and get what was rightfully theirs. These people are universally covered in dirt from head to toe and wear rags with no colors on them whatsoever. There's no apparent reason for this, but that's the way they dress. The other category is only this blue-dressed lady who has washed her face and has a nice blue dress on. Do you spot the difference? She has a son by an unknown father who also seems to be more sympathetic towards being a servant of Sauron, finds a weird hilt dagger thing. It's a magic sword that they had at some point. This is a huge missed opportunity. If you're doing a show, The Lord of the Rings didn't go into the humans who sided with Sauron and Morgoth. If this show's going to do that, there's room here to expand, to get creative with what these people believe and why they believe what they believe. There are reasons why people take working for the Dark Lord. There are reasons why people join fascists in the real world. So let's see some of that. These people seem to be dirt poor in the Southlands. Maybe they want the wealth. Maybe they want the richer land and territory that's owned by the elves and other men in the West. And maybe that was what was promised to them by Morgoth. You could give them an aesthetic where they fancy themselves to be regal and royal and end up creating crowns and jewelry out of whatever they have, like wood and bone and glass, instead of jewels and metals. Maybe they use whatever dyes they do have to try to give themselves the appearance of regalness in this very, very poor circumstance, and you end up with this weird disconnect where these people are almost like pauper kings, and have that sort of resentment and this keening, this yearning for a better future for themselves that is being denied to them. And some other people, it'd be nice if it was just more than one beautiful woman, who are trying to live down that past. Think Germany post-World War II. There are opportunities here, and they're not taken, and it's a crying shame, in my opinion. Also, if they sided with Morgoth and Sauron and they're so willing to work for them again, the conflict is that the orcs and Sauron are encroaching on the Southlands, and the land is being destroyed, and the people are being killed and run out of their homes, and they need to go flee and find shelter. Why, though, would this be a thing? Why not have Sauron come to the people in person and say, hey, your time has come, work for me again? I don't understand. It's such a silly waste of resources, and it's not smart, ultimately. That's my problem with it. It's not smart. It's a pointless conflict. Let's talk about the orcs. The orcs are actually the point that I am the most unambiguously in praise of. The orcs feel like orcs. I don't know what the process was to make them look the way they do. They look very practical. It's clearly people in sort of prosthetics, much like in Lord of the Rings. They look fantastic, and they feel like orcs in their performances and in their speech. I believe these orcs are real. I think they're great. They have a different aesthetic from Lord of the Rings. They have sort of like bones and snake skins and stuff like that. That's fine. Their aesthetic is cool. I like the orcs in this show, just not the way they're employed by the story. The wargs, on the other hand, look like this. What the fuck? And let's talk about Sauron. Sauron, at least called Adar in this show, is presented in episode 4. And listen, this might be a bait and switch situation. This might not be the real Sauron. Sauron could have taken on a disguise and be somebody else that we've already seen in the show, or someone we haven't seen in the show. But if this is meant to be a fake out, it's a boring fake out. Adar looks like an elf with burn marks on his face. He speaks very softly, and he says, "I'm not a god, not yet." Boring villain stuff. He says, "I want you to give a message. You, badass, cool, black elf man, to the humans of the Southlands who have run away from me and my orcs, who have gone to this old elven watchtower to hide." And that message ends up being surrender. Why he didn't come to them in peace and do that, I have no effing idea. And that's the thing. The Sauron of this age, at least presented in the Silmarillion, is somebody who has guile, who talks to people, who's a deceiver character, right? Which is very interesting and a good place for the show to go to better characterize a being who's ultimately more of an elemental force of evil in the Lord of the Rings. And the show doesn't do that. It's boring as hell, and a huge disappointment to me as a Lord of the Rings fan. There are a couple of things that I would do to change the way that the show works in a way that would be more dramatic, and this is my sort of way of putting a positive spin on this video. It's been a very, very negative time. It's a show that I'm ultimately never going to watch properly again. I'm going to skim through the last episode when the season's done to see where they ended up, but it's so bad that it's not even worth it for the sake of conferring with my dad or my girlfriend and talking it through, and breaking down why what went wrong was wrong and why it was bad storytelling, etc., which is always a good exercise to do. Doesn't feel like it's worth that anymore. But here's what I would do if I was writing this show. I would have Galadriel go off and have her, adventure in the north, but return home and find that Sauron has surrendered himself to the elves, is repenting, and wants to make amends for all the evil that he's done in the world. He's got all kinds of reasonable reasons, right, that he was with Morgoth. Morgoth forced him to do it, is one, but he accepts his responsibility for his actions, and he wants to be better, and he's willing to serve in any way and receive any punishment necessary to atone for his sins, and he's at the mercy of Galadriel. And Galadriel can be furious, and there can be a cell scene where she threatens to kill him, and he's gonna let her kill him. but you can't do it because he seems so genuine in his repentance, and then have him be played as a good guy, and he's giving advice to the elves, and he's helping Celebrimbor to forge the Rings of Power, and only our meta-knowledge as an audience tells us that he's eventually going to betray everybody, right? Have him be 100% a good guy, and have only Galadriel be suspicious of him. It's so much more of an interesting, dramatic way of diving into it, and you can have all kinds of scenes with him where you get more into his perspective on everything. It's such an interesting perspective to get a look into in a way we haven't seen before in Lord of the Rings. And at the same time, magic or whatever, he could be corrupting the Numenorians towards their eventual war against the Valar and the destruction of Numenor, right? And Elendil will be the only one who survives that. Because that's something that he does in the Silmarillion, and it can be a really cool parallel, and you can see the corrupting influence that he has, right? And they only catch it right before it's too late, when he's forging the One Ring and they get the premonition, right? And making gifts to the dwarves and gifts to the various kings of men, while he amasses his orcs and makes his forge in Mount Doom, in what will eventually be Mordor, right? There's a lot of opportunity there for something more dramatic, something more interesting, and that's what I would do with the show. Guys, thank you for watching, and yeah, that's basically it.